Welcome to Tossing Grenade the Windmills. Windmills.
I'm currently working on my 5th novel, which is called Forever West. Precyber is my 3rd novel. I wrote it, as I mentioned before, with Ken Leitner. My first novel was called a lot of things. I never quite figured out a title I liked for it. And to be honest, well, there's some really good stuff in there. It's not as good as the other ones. It's currently called Eye of the Mindstorm. It was part 2 of a 2-part novel. The second one I wrote was much better in terms of plot and character and general writing. But all of the characters in it were assholes, so I kind of put the two to bed. And then the 3rd novel I wrote, I'm terribly sorry, Precyber is the 4th novel that I wrote with Ken. The 3rd novel I wrote was called Grenade Man vs. the Zombies, and that's actually likely to come out in the near future. I'll probably put it out on Kindle first, and then once I learn how to use the right programs, I'll make a print version. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and get started. Precyber by Ken Leitner and T.C. Ricks. Chapter 34. Although Clark knew about the elevator, Horace had talked him into taking the stairs at least once a day in order to get into shape. Each morning, Clark would take the elevator down to get food for the day and then hike up 50 stories to the computer floor. He liked having the time to reflect on his life up to this point. Clark's thoughts turned to his finances. He had a decent job and lived frugally, just slightly above the homelessness. He had accumulated a nice little nest egg of cash. However, his bank account was hovering slightly below his credit debt, and that did not even count his car note. Somewhere, Clark had wasted a great deal of money. He had a few bad habits, mostly the sort that were fairly minor, but did cost a fair amount of money. He liked to eat out. He read somewhere that a person could save anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000 a year by eating in 5 or 6 days a week. If he had saved that money, he might have a house down payment by now. He had a full cable package and a phone contract with all the bells and whistles. Those were definitely part of the problem as well. However, reality and online games were Clark's worst habit. He remembered one of the more ridiculous games he had played, Marauder's Crag. Marauder's Crag was a microtransaction game. You could log in and pay for free as long as you wanted. However, you had to pay small fees in order to access elements of the game. For example, you could find small healing potions, but they were nearly useless once you leveled up a bit. As you moved into the more challenging areas, you needed to go into town and buy more good potions. But for each one you bought in the game, it also charged your real account 10 cents. Higher level potions cost more. Most players just played for free for a while and then moved on to another free game. However, a good percentage did create the pay accounts and ended up paying slightly more for what they would in the fixed monthly fee game. Marauder's Crag took the microtransaction fees to a whole new level, though. It was unique in the fact that a small percentage of hardcore players spent enormous sums each month. The final storyline levels of Marauder's Crag were ridiculous and infamously difficult. Only a handful of players had ever beaten them, and those that had gained significant online reputation had done quite well. The designers had even posted a $30 million reward for the first to solve it in the right amount of time. Clark, of course, had beaten the game. In fact, he had only missed winning the reward by 47 hours. Clark figured out what few others had. The designers developed the game around microtransactions. Therefore, Clark decided the best equipment for beating the game had to have the highest real-life cost. This turned out to be a weird suit of armor with particularly bad stat whose only useful ability was to allow you to carry 1,000 potions. He further decided that the solution must involve loading up on these potions. The highest level potion cost 50 cents to $50 for the revive potion that would bring you back from the dead. His first attempt cost him $1,000 in equipment costs. It took him 17 tries to beat the game, and his re-equipping costs went up each time. Clark consciously avoided tracking how much he had spent on the game. However, now he thought back and decided he had probably wasted $20,000 to $25,000 on that stupid game. He kicked himself mentally for his stupidity. His only consolation was that he was hopefully learning not to make the same mistake again. Clark cursed the game out, and then he cursed the designers that had created the game essentially to rip off hardcore players. His frustration increased as he realized what enormous profits the game must be generating from them. And then it hit him. He had the perfect next mission for himself and Horse. Clark had to take down that game, and he knew exactly how to do it. In most games, the hardcore players would post walkthrough explanations of how to beat it. Marauders Craig had avoided that because, in Clark's opinion, the few players who would beat the game were too embarrassed by how much money they had spent doing it. Clark decided he would need to send every player the solution and equipment necessary. He could still remember the potion mix he used: 50 revive potions, 400 max healing potions, and 550 mana max potions. He didn't even have to send a full spoiler-style walkthrough. He could get most people through it with a couple of basic hints. The company would lose millions of dollars. The people playing it would love it. It was perfect. And again, he needed a customer service rep. He just needed a customer service rep account to make it happen. He guessed he would need to be on site as well. The only issue was that he did not know anyone in the company. He had always considered the whole company a little less ethical and avoided any contact. Many of his friends refused to work there. Clark thought a little and decided it was time to take advantage of his partner, Horse. They could simply break in, rifle a few desks, and find an account someone had written down and use it. He could not wait to share the plan with Horse and Gabriel. As tired as he was, he picked up his pace and hurried up the last few flights of stairs. The next day, Horse had made all the arrangements for the break-in. Clark was in charge of disabling the alarm and using the service accounts to send out messages and equipment. Horse would break in and find an appropriate account to use. They had the good fortune to learn that the company outsourced their customer service to a firm in Bhutan. That meant no one would be around when they broke in that night. Clark spent the daylight hours reading up on alarm systems and their weaknesses. The one used by MC Enterprises, the LLC which had developed and operated Marauder's Crag, looked easy. It had an audible alert and used a cell phone connection to alert the police. It had a single battery backup in case the power shut off. However, it only allowed 1 minute for the correct code and did not lock out the wrong code when it was entered. The code was a simple 4-digit number, which meant a mere 10,000 possibilities. 1 minute meant 60 seconds, or 0.006 seconds per possibility in the worst case. An impossible feat for a human, but Clark learned that the keypad connected to the alarm was connected via a simple USB cable. Clark could connect the laptop to the keyboard and spin the code. Spinning meant trying every possible combination until one worked. His laptop could probably finish, worst case, in about 50 seconds. That night, Horse brought him around to the back of the building and promptly threw a brick through the glass door. Horse reached in, turned the knob, and opened the door. The only acknowledgement Horse showed to the now beeping alarm was a barely detectable sense of urgency. Clark ran through the door, slipped on the broken glass, and he landed on his bum amidst the tiny shards of glass. More embarrassed than hurt, Clark sat up and looked around for the alarm keypad. He pointed it to it as Horse pulled him up off the ground. Thankfully, it was exactly as he expected. He disconnected the cord, patched in his laptop, and started to hack the program. The alarm immediately shut off. Clark looked down to find out that the code they used was 0000. The building they found themselves in was a modest suburban office park building. They had a normal brick exterior and a cheap carpet flooring. Brick is cheap and common in Georgia, where most of the clay soil is almost brick already. Horse mentioned for Clark to follow him. Knowing Horse had memorized the layout yesterday, Clark did so until they reached an area of office cubicles. Horse started searching through the cubicles, looking for an account name and password. Clark walked down a few rows and started doing the same. He found just what they needed at the first desk. He sat down and got to work. Clark was pleasantly surprised to find himself at the developer's desk logging with the developer's privileges. Clark knew a little code, and if he wanted, he could actually change the game. But he decided to stick to the plan for now. He logged into the game's database and did a test query for user accounts. Clark smiled as names scrolled past on the screen. A familiar name, Timothy Heath, caught his attention. Gabriel had been helping Clark clear his name. So far, they had not gotten far, but they had learned the name of Mary Heath and her son Timothy. It seemed Clark had annoyed her with his gold farming, and she had responded by hiring corporate assassins. Her name showed up all over the place. Apparently, she had tried every contact in the book to get back at Clark. Clark decided a person like that needed a little time in the sun, and who better than himself to provide it? He wrote out a short program to gift each player with the necessary equipment and send an in-game message with the hints. He edited it slightly to delay everyone's gift equipment except Timothy Heath's until 3 in the afternoon. It was summer break, and Clark was betting Timmy would be at home playing. When the script ran, he sent an email to Timmy asking him to try Marauder's Crag one more time and explain why. Conveniently, the email would originate from a certain developer at MC Enterprises. He also thought about the $30 million prize and wondered if he could reactivate it. He smiled when he realized how easily he could. In fact, the game was set up to send out press releases automatically when the prize was re-enabled and when someone won. Mary Heath was a bit surprised to find all the reporters outside of her home. What was going on? As she pulled out of her driveway, one of them saw her and ran toward her. She could tell by the silver band on their wrist that they were fully wired with the latest in immersive technology. This was all being broadcast, which meant that this was something bad. Had someone found out about what she had done to take down Clark, or were they finally here to vindicate her position? She took a deep breath and opened her car door. A wave of sound hit her with physical force, and she had to get back and get a hold of herself. She said, "Hello," another wave of questions all at once. She had received basic media training just like everyone else at her level in the Corp, but that had largely consisted of don't say anything until the PR people get there. And for lack of anything better to do, she fell back on that. She looked around for a few minutes before she finally caught some of the words that they were saying. "My son!" She looked around the house with great concern. "What about my son?" She pushed them back, in one case literally shoving the pushy bastard out of the way. When it came to her kids, she had the strength of 100. Then she caught the question. "How do you feel about winning Marauder's Crag challenge, ma'am?" Wait. She'd heard about that. Her son played it a lot. It was one of the games he was always complaining that he never had enough money to play. In fact, it was half the reason she had been so upset about the damn pirate game. She had introduced him to it in hopes that he would stop bothering her so much about the damn Marauder's Crag game. It was supposed to be free. She had thought he had stopped playing it, and she had hoped he had stopped playing it. He got upset every time he died, and then apparently that was quite often. The reporter was a woman in her late 20s, sexy and dignified. She looked like someone who had been genetically bred for those two qualities. That produced originality and authenticity. Mary did not recognize her logo, though, which meant that she could represent any kind of ideology. Her face soured. "I think that," and then she realized what the reporter had asked. "Wait, won?" "Yes, he won earlier today. He's the first child ever to do so. Aren't you proud of him?" "Well, yes, of course. I'm just surprised. Wait, how do you win an MMO? I thought you never won those things." The reporters all laughed as if she had said the most clever thing in the world. She smiled in hope her life was not ruined now. She had seen it happen before. Heck, she had done it a few times herself on media! Exclamation point. She was not anywhere near the player her son was, but she had been to parties just like anyone else. Another reporter, this man was heavy-set and very angry-looking, asked, "How do you feel about the revolutionary message associated with your son's victory?" That floored her. She looked again at the garage door. "What?" "As a good corporate employee, surely you realize the official national position against the various groups collectively known as the Revolution. They've revealed the combination of items that allowed your son to win the game. They said that the game was rigged and that people had a right to know. How do you feel about that?" Wait, the game was rigged?" A third reporter nodded. "That's right, ma'am. The company denies it." A second reporter scowled at the third. "And you'll believe a bunch of terrorists over a responsible corporate citizen?" Something inside of Mary Heath burst. She'd seen her son suffer far too much for that game. To find out that it was rigged just made her blood boil. Forget Clark. Forget coconuts. Heads were going to roll for this. A fourth reporter said, "So now that your son has won $30 million prize, do you think you'll keep working?" Mary stopped thinking for a moment. That didn't last long, though. It was kind of hard to have heads of the people who were supposedly paying you $30 million roll. She smiled politely and said, I'm afraid I need to talk to my son right now. I'll have to hold off on your questions until then. The reporters laughed a second time, but this time Mary could tell it was good-natured. The public liked rich people. Rich people could pay for good press, and apparently right now that included her, or at least her son. She waved at them very carefully, opened the front door, and closed it behind her. Her son was there, smiling and clearly terrified at the same time. Both of them knew he was not terrified by the extremely overactive reporters either, and they both knew why her son had not called. Clark laughed as he watched the telecast press conference. The looks on Mary's face had been priceless. Horace had gotten a good laugh as well. Horace, understand now why you gave this money to this kid. That was awesome. Clark nodded. Let's just hope it gives the revolution a positive spin on things for once. He was not very hopeful, but in the end, that was all they could do. 3 days later, MC Enterprises declared bankruptcy. The fact that Mary Heath and her son never received a penny of the reward money never made it into the news at all.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. I'm Thomas Ricks. Music by Melanie Ricks. Voices by Skip Huffman and Josie Bergen-Lawson. Copyright 2012.
Kenneth Leitner
And Red Anvil Amalgamated.
to fight the forces of evil.